As the Gray family's car traveled down a narrow back road, a glint of the sun gleamed across the fields. Gripping the steering wheel, Mark occasionally cast glances at his wife Deborah, who was busy scrolling through her phone. Their teenage twins, Paul and Jerry, chatted happily in the back seat while eating egg sandwiches. "It's great to be going home again. We've been away for too long." Mark sighed with relief. "Oh yeah, I can't wait to see our old church, Mark." Deborah nodded in agreement, her eyes beaming with joy. "I can't wait to see Marvin," Paul said. "And Wesley," Jerry chimed in. "I wonder what they look like now." Jerry laughed. "I bet Wesley is still small and skinny." Paul shook his head in disagreement. Mark grinned. "Who wants to go fishing with me?" The church is nestled beside the pond. Deborah's eyes sparkled as she watched her husband and boys. "Yes, this revival camp meeting is exactly what we need. I know the Lord has something good store for us." The town of Greenville was packed with people. Everyone was excited. Children were running around, jumping and shouting. Parents were happily caught up with their old friends. Big tents were set up on the church property, and the scent of freshly cooked barbecue filled the air. Women busied themselves preparing the tables, while the men set up chairs in preparation for the evening service. The young people held out flyers, handing them to visitors. Mark and Deborah watched their twins laughing with their old friends, Wesley and Marvin. As the people began to sing, Deborah felt the presence of God moving. Everyone lifted their hands in reverence. As the congregation sang in unity, a sense of serenity filled the air. Deborah was in awe. This was the moment she had been longing for. Out of the corner of her eye, Deborah noticed a woman in the back row. She was kneeling, looking distressed, her shoulders slumped as if carrying a heavy burden. Her body trembled, and Deborah heard her silent sobs. The woman clutched a white, wrinkled handkerchief. Deborah was saddened by the sight. She walked slowly to the woman, gently placing a handsel on her shoulder and whispering prayers of comfort. The woman burst into tears, and Deborah felt the weight of pain she was carrying. "You're not alone," Deborah whispered. "Whatever it is you're carrying, you are not alone." "Thank you," the woman whispered, looking bashful. "It means a lot to me." "Deborah, I'm Deborah. My name is Catherine." Catherine smiled wryly, wiping the tears from her eyes. Her gaze was tired, her eyes swollen from so much crying. She looked deep into Deborah's eyes. "Thank you for your kindness, Deborah." Deborah gently placed a hand on Catherine's shoulder. "Are you from here, Catherine?" Catherine nodded. "We moved here 10 years ago. I love this church. I've been going here ever since." Deborah called Mark and the twins. "Catherine, this is my husband, Mark, and my twins, Paul and Jerry." "How do you do, Catherine?" asked Mark, nodding. "Hello, Mark." "Hello, Paul and Jerry," said Catherine, slightly nodding her head. "I can't stay. I have to go now," Catherine said, glancing at her watch frantically. "Why don't you join us for dinner? There's plenty of food, Catherine," Deborah said. Catherine looked around as if afraid of something. "Are you all right, Catherine?" Deborah asked, worried. It's my husband, Steve," Catherine said hesitantly. "He's not a believer yet." Catherine paused. "But I know that nothing is impossible with God. I've been coming to the Dawn Watch prayer meeting every day, praying for God's miracle." The late afternoon sun bathed the Gray family's living room in golden light as Mark, Deborah, Paul, and Jerry sat together, discussing the upcoming community outreach event. "I was thinking," Mark said, rubbing his chin, "we could visit the Maplewood neighborhood. There are a lot of people there who haven't been to church in years." Deborah nodded. "That's a great idea, but I also want to invite Catherine. I think she'd love to help." "Miss Catherine?" Paul piped up, his big eyes shining. "She's so nice. Can she come with us?" Deborah smiled. "I'll go ask her." Catherine was delighted when Deborah knocked on her door and invited her along. "I'd love to," she said, grabbing her purse. "Steve is out drinking again, so he won't even notice I'm gone." The group spent the afternoon walking through Maplewood, knocking on doors and sharing the message of God's love. Catherine felt a deep joy as she spoke with people, inviting them to the revival. She could feel God working through her, filling her heart with peace. But while she was out serving the Lord, trouble was brewing at home. Steve stumbled into the house at exactly 6 o'clock, his head buzzing from the drinks he'd had at the bar. He kicked off his shoes, expecting the usual sight. Catherine greeting him with a warm smile, dinner on the table. But instead, the house was empty. No Catherine, no food, no welcoming smile. His drunken mind fumed. Where is she? His eyes darted to the clock. 6 o'clock. She should be here. Steve slammed his fist onto the table. So, this is how she repays me, running off to that church nonsense instead of doing her job as my wife. His anger bubbled over, and before he could think, he stalked toward the front door, twisted the lock, and yanked out the key. If she wants to act like she doesn't need this home, then let's see how she feels about sleeping outside, he muttered, pocketing the key. Hours later, Catherine returned, humming softly, but when she tried the door, it didn't budge. She knocked gently. Steve? No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Realization dawned. He had locked her out. Instead of panic or anger, Catherine simply sighed. She sat down on the porch, resting her back against the door. The night air was cool, but she wasn't afraid. Lord, she whispered, gazing up at the sky, I trust you. Thank you for giving me peace. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Steve groggily stumbled to the door, rubbing his eyes. His head pounded from last night's drinking, and all he wanted was his morning newspaper. He swung the door open and froze. There, leaning against the doorframe, was Catherine, sleeping. His breath hitched. She had spent the entire night outside. His first instinct was to scoff, to call her foolish, but something stopped him. She wasn't shivering in anger or crying in frustration. Instead, as she slowly stirred awake, she looked up at him with a soft, gentle smile. Good morning, dear, she said sweetly, stretching. What do you want for breakfast? Steve stared at her, completely motionless. His mind reeled. How? How does she do this? He had locked her out. He had expected her to cry, to beg, to break. But instead, she greeted him with kindness, as if nothing had happened. For the first time, a strange feeling settled in his chest, one he didn't understand. I want what she has. Something had changed in Steve. Catherine noticed it in the little things. He no longer slammed the door when he came home. He still scowled, still sat in his chair watching the news with his arms crossed, but there was a hesitation in his anger, like a man waging war inside himself. Then, one evening, something completely unexpected happened. Hey, Steve, let's go, man. One of his old drinking buddies, Mike, called from outside. Steve stood in the living room, watching the flickering TV screen. The invitation was tempting. He had always gone out at this time. But then his gaze drifted to the kitchen, where Catherine stood, humming as she stirred a pot of stew. He hesitated. Come on, let's hit the bar, another friend shouted. Catherine turned, curious to see what Steve would do. She held her breath. Steve took a deep breath, clenched his fists, then let them go. Nah, he said, loud enough for them to hear. Not tonight. Silence. Mike scoffed. What, you sick or something? No, Steve muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't feel like it. His friends exchanged looks, laughing. Since when do you say no to a drink? Steve met Catherine's gaze. Her eyes were filled with something he had never seen directed at him before. Hope. His voice was firmer this time. I said no. The sound of his friends cursing and driving away didn't bother him. For the first time, he felt something different in his chest, a strange peace. Catherine tried to hide her joy, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She quietly turned back to the stove, thanking God in her heart. Something was happening. The next morning, Catherine came home from the Dawn Watch prayer meeting, expecting the usual. Steve still asleep, the house silent. But when she stepped inside, she froze. Steve was sitting in the living room, fully dressed, awake, waiting. A strange fear struck her heart. Why is he awake? Is something wrong? "Steve?" she asked cautiously. He didn't respond at first. Instead, he stood up, walked into the kitchen, and returned holding a plate of scrambled eggs and a steaming cup of coffee. He placed it on the table in front of her. Catherine blinked. Her heart pounded. "What is this?" Steve swallowed hard, his rough hands trembling. I made you breakfast." Catherine covered her mouth, stunned. He shifted uncomfortably, then looked her in the eyes. "I don't deserve you, Catherine." His voice cracked. "After everything I've done, after the way I treated you, His voice broke completely. He fell to his knees. Tears streamed down Catherine's face. "Steve?" Steve looked up, his eyes filled with desperation. "I need to know, Catherine. How? How do you have this peace, this joy? Even when I hurt you, you never fought back. You never hated me. I don't understand. But I want it. I want what you have." Catherine sobbed, kneeling beside him. "Oh, Steve. Will you help me?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I want to know God the way you do." Catherine wiped her tears and took his hands. "Then let's pray." That morning, in their little living room, Steve Gray surrendered his life to Jesus. Months later, Steve's transformation was nothing short of a miracle. He cut ties with his old drinking buddies. The very sight of alcohol disgusted him. Instead of sitting in bars, he sat with his Bible, devouring every word, hungry for the truth. He started attending church, not just attending, but leading. The fire in his heart was undeniable. Soon, the same man who had once mocked his wife for praying was now preaching. As the months passed, Steve began traveling, sharing his testimony. His words carried power, real power. His sermons weren't just words. They ignited souls, healed the broken-hearted, and brought sinners to repentance. And then the impossible happened. One day, while preaching in a crowded revival meeting, a woman in a wheelchair wept as Steve prayed over her. The moment his hands touched her, she stood, she walked. Gasps filled the room. People screamed, some fell to their knees in worship. Steve stepped back, stunned. It wasn't him. It had never been him. It was God. From that moment on, wherever Steve went, miracles followed. The sick were healed, the lost were found, and hearts were changed. Catherine stood in the crowd, watching her husband, the man she had prayed for, wept for, standing before thousands, declaring the goodness of God. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "There is nothing impossible for God." And in that moment she knew it was all worth it.
Welcome to our channel, Youth on the Rock. Jesus is the rock. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel.